today's daf we're going to be learning is Pesachim Nun Hey. We're going to start at the bottom of Nun Dalet Amud Bet. We were in the middle of, we're going to start with a comparison. We're going to get to a lot of different topics today. We're going to start with a comparison that we were finished with of Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. So again, this is a good question of where do things fit into what categories, okay? We have all these categorizations of where we see Tisha B'Av as kind of like regular fast. It's also like Yom Kippur in certain ways. And these other fasts that we're a little bit less familiar with, which are these severe fasts that they instituted for rain, and where do those fall in? So we have this source that we ended with. Ein bein Tisha B'Av l'Yom Kippurim. It sounds like all these Mishnayot, if you remember, for those who learned in Masechet Megillah. There's no difference between this and this other than this, okay? And the like Adar Rishon, Adar Sheni, or Pesach. Anyway, all sorts of things. But ein bein Tisha B'Av l'Yom Kippurim ela shezeh sveko asur v'zeh sveko mutar. Right, that any kind of doubtful situation about Yom Kippur, we're going to forbid, and Tisha B'Av we're going to permit, which we weren't sure what that meant. In the end, we concluded it must mean that if you were messed up the day or something, you might have to theoretically keep 2 Yom Kippurs in a row, whereas that would never be for Tisha B'Av. Your one day that you fasted would cover you, even if it was maybe the wrong day. But now they say, okay, so one can infer from that what? And this is always a good question about inferring things. Ha l'chol dvarim zeh v'zeh shavin. Sounds like in every other way, Tisha B'Av is like Yom Kippur. So the first thing they comment about this is Misayel ele Rabbi Elazar. This would support what Rabbi Elazar said. Tamar Rabbi Elazar, asur lo adam sheyoshit etzba'o b'mayim b'Tisha B'Av, k'derech she'asur lo yoshit etzba'o b'Yom Kippurim. You can't even get your finger wet on Tisha B'Av, just like you can't get your finger wet on Yom Kippur, right? One of the things that you're forbidden to do is to wash your body and wash any part of your body. So here you see, we're going to be as severe with Tisha B'Av as we are with Yom Kippur. Meitive, but that's going to contradict another source that we're going to also make an inference from. Ein bein Tisha B'Av l'taniyot tzibur. Okay, there's no difference between Tisha B'Av and these public fasts. Ela shezeh asur b'asiyat melacha v'zeh mutar b'asiyat melacha b'makom shenahagu. Is that those public fast days are forbidden to do malacha, whereas Tisha B'Av, you can do malacha if you live in a place where, that's where we started, where people work on Tisha B'Av. So now, what do you assume? Now, what they say, but there's a problem with this. Why? We haven't gotten to the problem yet. Ha l'chol divreihen. It sounds like for everything else, again, if you say ein bein, which sounds kind of like a reasonable inference. If you say there's no difference between this and this except for this, it sounds like you really mean they're entirely the same. Now, if they're entirely the same, well, what do we know about Taniyot Tzibur when it comes to washing? We just made an inference that Tisha B'Av, you can't even get your finger wet. But now if we're going to assume they're like these other public fasts in every way except for the issue of working, then we're going to conclude that they're the same when it comes to washing. And we're going to see that that's going to contradict what we said about Yom Kippur, that the similarity to Yom Kippur. Why? Meitive. Sorry. Okay, when it comes to public fast, what does it say? When they said they're forbidden to wash, when they said that on public fast days you're not allowed to wash your body, they meant only your whole body, but you could wash your face, your hands, and your feet. So now, if we're going to say that Tisha B'Av is like them in all ways except for malacha, then we're going to conclude that Tisha B'Av will be allowed to wash your hands, your feet, and your face. And we just said that if it's all like Yom Kippur, except for the safek, a doubtful case, then it's going to say you can't wash even your finger. So how do we reconcile this? Amar Papa, Tana Kule Kule Katane. This is an interesting way to read it. When they said ein bein this to that, but this, in both cases, notice what they tried to say. They were saying Tisha B'Av is more lenient than Yom Kippur when it comes to a doubtful situation, and more lenient than the other public fasts when it comes to malacha, working, which means then that we're basically going to infer from there that the focus of both those sources was only to teach you a way that Tisha B'Av is more lenient. It doesn't mean it's similar in every other way. It could be more stringent than, well, it's not going to be more stringent than Yom Kippur, but at least the other fasts, it could be more stringent than them in terms of washing. Okay, and here you see that therefore we're going to say so you don't, even though it says ein bein this to that, except for this, it means in a lenient direction, not in a more stringent direction, and therefore it's not a contradiction. And I couldn't help but think about this story, because in general, there's a question that comes up, what about regular fast? You're allowed to shower on a regular fast day, the smaller fasts. So it reminded me, and we say you can shower, but it reminded me of a story. I was in Russia in 1990, I believe it was. We ran these YUSSR summer camps, and we thought it was all set up. When we got there, it turns out it wasn't set up at all. We were in Novosibirsk, like far out from, like in the middle of Siberia. Luckily, it was the summer. It was hot, although you'll see in a minute, it wasn't so lucky for us, because the first place we stayed till we got to the camps weren't really as organized as they had said they were going to be, and we had to figure things out. We needed to find translators. We needed to do all these things, and we stayed in this person's apartment, a bunch of us, for a week, and there was no shower. There was a bath there that was full of stuff. You couldn't use it. So we didn't shower for an entire week. And the first day that we moved to a different place and there were showers was Shivasar B'Tammuz, fast day. And we started thinking that maybe, this year, maybe it shouldn't exactly be appropriate, because it's a real pleasure to shower after 7 days of not showering in the middle of the summer. But anyway, we did shower because it seems like it's okay. But it reminded me of that when I saw this Gemara. Okay. Even though, again, I want to stress, according to most of the commentaries, all the Taniyot what we're talking about here are not the small fast days. We're talking about the more severe ones that are instituted when there's no rain. Ubekol makom tamid chacham. Okay, now we go back to this element of the Mishnah. The Mishnah talked about Tisha B'Av. You can't do work on Tisha B'Av. And then it said, depends on where you live, right? If you live in a place where you can, then great, no problem. However, Talmidei Chachamim, wherever they live, don't do work. That was Tanakama. Rashbag said, well, you should try to be like a Talmid Chacham. And notice Tanakama didn't say that. So we're assuming they have a machloket about this. So now the Gemara says, L'meimer de Rashbag savar lo chashinan liyehora, ve'Rabbanan savar chashinan liyehora. Do you want to try to say that Rashbag says, I don't care if you look like I'm better than you and I'm going to be like a Talmid Chacham and I'm not going to do work. That's okay. That doesn't bother him. Whereas Tanakama says, no. If you're not a Talmid Chacham, don't try to say, oh, I'm holier than thou, and here, look at me, I'm not going to work on Tisha B'Av. That's not appropriate. You're making yourself look like you're better than you are and like a show off. So it seems like Rashbag is saying, we don't care that you're going to show off. And Rabbanan say, we are concerned that you're going to look like a show off. But there's a problem with this, because if you look at what they say elsewhere, and we learned this in Masechet Brachot, if you remember, a long time ago, about a year ago, Titnan, Chatan im yirtze likot kriyat shema layla harishon koreh. Rashbag omer lo kol harotze litol et Hashem yitol. In this argument, they say the exact opposite. What do they say? A chatan, someone who is getting married, someone whose wedding is that night, they don't have to say kriyat shema. Why? If you remember, so there's this issue of, first of all, he's what we call in the it sounded in the beginning like he's osek b'mitzvah. He's busy doing a mitzvah, which is sleeping with his wife on the first night of their marriage. On the other hand, he's not exactly doing that when he's saying Shema, but he's tarud b'mitzvah. He's focusing, he's worried about it, he's concerned about it, and therefore won't be able to focus properly on kriyat shema. Okay, nowadays, we assume most people don't have focus, and therefore most people say this isn't even relevant anymore. But when people were better about having the proper intent in their prayer, so chatan, what if you decide, listen, I can have intent, right? The chatan, the groom, he can say, I can do it. I'm going to say it anyway. So if he wants to, according to Tanakama, he can do it. Rashbag says, no, you can't just use Hashem's name like that. No, you can't do it. Now, it sounds like Rashbag is saying, don't say I'm better than the average groom and I can focus better. And that's arrogant. Tanakama says, no, if you can do it, great. Just like Rashbag said about if you can stop, not work on Tisha B'Av, it's great. So seems to be the exact opposite. So first answer, classic Gemara answer in a case like this, switch the shitot around. Okay, it must be we got confused somewhere, the transmission, it got confused, and it should be the reverse in one of the places, right? One place is wrong, one place is right, match them up, and then everybody aligns perfectly. But Rav Shisha b'lei Rav Idi Amar lo tepoch. And now he's going to explain each case separately according to both interpretations. First, the rabbi's approach. Why would they distinguish between these two cases? And then Rashbag's approach, why he would distinguish between the two cases. So, de Rabbanan lo kashya. The rabbis don't contradict each other. If you're in a place where everybody is working and you don't work, then you look like you're being better. You're saying, I'm putting myself in the category of Talmidei Chachamim and I'm not working. Obviously, we could say the reverse, right? Again, this is classic Gemara logic. We'll get back to that. Aval hatam, but when it comes to Kriyat Shema, kevan de kulei amakari, ve'iunami kare lo mirse ki Yehovan. This is very interesting. When he's a chatan and he says, I'm better than the average groom and I can say Kriyat Shema and I can focus, he's not in a category, he's not in a place where he's with all these other grooms and he's saying, I can do better than you. He's in a community, maybe he's in shul and he's with all these other people, or even if he's not in shul, he's doing something that by him doing what he's not obligated to do, he ends up doing the same thing as everybody else. He just kind of fits right in. So he doesn't stand out in any way. Whereas not working, you're making yourself stand out. So that's one perspective of it. Again, obviously you can say the opposite perspective. Dirashbag, he also doesn't contradict himself. Why? What do you need for Shema? You need intent. Anan Sadeh means everybody knows. Everybody knows what? That you don't have the proper kavana. It's impossible for anyone in that kind of situation to really focus. And therefore, if you're going to go ahead and do it, that really looks arrogant. And I see the question, it's not Kriyat Shema Lamita. We're talking about the Chovav Kriyat Shema in the morning and at night. We're talking about the night of, he has to say Kriyat Shema. Aval hacha lo michse ki Yehovan. Amre, but in this case, it doesn't look arrogant at all. If you don't work on Tisha B'Av, we already said this, what's going to be? Amre, right? Malachahu delayed lahu, right? There's a high unemployment rate. This person must just not have found work that day. Right? Look how many people don't work, right? Either out of choice or not out of choice, right? More likely, I would assume in those days, it was not because they just wanted to be lazy, but they just really couldn't find work. And therefore, there's a lot of people without work. It doesn't stand out if you're not working. It's true you're doing something different than the average, but you're just not doing anything, right? It's also passive versus active, right? You're just not working. Someone could just assume, oh, you just didn't find work that day. So therefore, there's not necessarily a contradiction. Mishnah. Chachamim omrim. Okay, now we have a bit of a strange Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to question it immediately because, first of all, we started our chapter with work on Erev Pesach, and what did we say? It all depends on Minhag HaMakom, where you live and what they do in the place that you live, if we're talking about not working in the morning. The rabbis now say, so then, right, then we got off topic. We went into all sorts of other minhagim, and now we're coming back to Erev Pesach. In Yehuda, they would do malacha b'arvei pesachim ad chatzot, u'begalil lo hayu osim kol ikar. Okay, in Yehuda, they would do malacha, and in the Galil, they wouldn't. Halayla, now, when does this start? We assumed until now, when we said until chatzot, there's a minhag. I assume most of you thought, at least I thought, right? I had in my head from the morning. So that's because most people work in the morning. Most people didn't work at night. But now there's a debate. What happens at night? Halayla, what about the night before? Right? Is this forbidden? And this goes back to the basic question. What's the idea here of not working on Erev Pesach? And this connects for those who went to the skills shir. Also, I talked about a little, Rabbanit and Dreyfus on Wednesday, and I talked about this a lot, the difference between Chag HaPesach and Erev Pesach. And Erev Pesach has two elements to it. One is it's a day where, right, nowadays we know we're super busy. There's so many things to do. And it's a day of preparation for the holiday. On the other hand, it also has this element of the sacrifice that was brought on that day. And that maybe that whole day is a sanctified day for that reason because of the sacrifice. Now, if it has to do with the sacrifice and the fact that they even called it then Chag HaPesach was, right, we call Pesach the 7 days, but they call Chag HaPesach the day of the sacrifice on Erev Pesach. So if you understand it as that day has sanctity, then you can understand just like any other holiday, it starts at night. So that's Beit Shammai. If it's just about having time to prepare for everything, you don't really need the night. Although, right now, you have to think about in those days, they didn't have lights at night. They weren't doing so much. Nowadays, right, one of the busiest nights in our lives is that night before Erev Pesach, right? We're busy trying to turn everything over and get everything done. And people do work at night. But in those days, they didn't really work at night. So therefore, the preparations were done during the day for the most part. So therefore, you would only need to do it from the morning. So now, what's the problem with this Mishnah? So let's just read the Gemara and you'll see immediately. In the original Mishnah, when we started the chapter, it was all about minhag. It's pen, right? It's not forbidden at all. But levasof tana isura. But in our Mishnah, it sounds like it's not just minhag hamakom. First of all, it said in the Galil they think this, in Yehuda they think this, and then there's a debate within, right? The people who forbid, is it from the night? Notice what Beit Shammai says. Oslim, we forbid. Forbid sounds like it's forbidden, not it's a custom. And then you have to understand what the Chachamim are saying is the Yehuda and Che Galil had a halachic debate, not about different customs. It was a halachic debate. Is it forbidden to do work or is it not forbidden to do work? That's a whole different thing. That's a real halachic debate. That's not the same as, oh, we do this nice custom, right? We don't work. So how could it be that we started off that this whole issue was a minhag, and from this mission, it sounds like it's halacha. Again, halacha with a debate. Is it a halacha? Is it not, right? Is it forbidden? Is it not forbidden? And when is it forbidden from? From the night or from the morning if you hold it's forbidden. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo kashya, ha-Rabbi Meir, ha-Rabbi Yehuda. He says these are two different approaches, in fact. The first Mishnah was said according to Rabbi Meir, who thinks it's all minhag. This Mishnah was said according to Rabbi Yehuda, who thinks it's a halachic debate. So now they say, how do we know this? Titania, as it says in a Braita, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, B'Yehuda hayu osim malacha b'arvei Pesachim ad chatzot, u'begalil ein osim kol ikar. That's exactly like our Mishnah. Amar lo Rabbi Meir says to him, Ma ha'aya Yehuda v'Galil lekan. Why are you bringing what the people in Judea think and what the people in the Galilee think? Ela makom shnagu la'asot malacha osim, makom shnagu shelo la'asot ein osim. He says it has nothing to do with what they hold and what they hold. It's a minhag, and it all depends on where you come from. So, midika'ama Rabbi Meir minhaga, the fact that Rabbi Meir is saying, what are you talking about? It's a minhag. That seems to imply that Rabbi Yehuda didn't think it was a minhag. Michal, from there you can apply to Rabbi Yehuda isura kamar, that Rabbi Yehuda must have thought it was forbidden. It was a halachic debate, and there were those who forbade in the Galilee, and that matches our Mishnah. So, now they're going to question, and this question is a little bit strange because the question is premised on the fact that Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the opinion of Yehuda that it's permitted. Okay, the question is all premised on. The question is, Sava Rabbi Yehuda arba'asar mutar b'asiyat melacha. Does he really think that halachically one can work on the 14th? Meaning, he thinks it's a halachic debate. It's not based on minhag, and he holds like the people of Judea. And if that's the case, that doesn't really make sense with another source that we see. The Hatanya, it says in a Braita. Now, you need some background here. We learned about the Omer. Remember, you bring the sacrifice of the Omer on the 16th, the second day of Pesach, and that permits all the new crop. Now, what is included in the new crop? We're now going to learn anything that took root for 3 days. Okay, that's Rabbi Yehuda's position. If it didn't yet take root for 3 days, it will not be permitted. You'll have to wait till the following year, which will be very annoying, right? To have to wait a whole year for your crops. So here we're going to see a Braita, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Let's say you're weeding your field on the 13th. And all of a sudden you accidentally pulled out, not a weed, but your crop, right? Your grain that you planted. You have to plant it in a soft place and not in a hard place so that it will take root. As the whole thing is you want to take root for 3 days before the 16th. So what do you see here? Notice what he said. He specifically said you're doing this on the 13th. He could have easily said the 14th because you'd still have 3 days, and we're going to get to this in a minute. Why didn't he say the 14th, right? So now they're going to tell you something that I already told you, which is if it didn't take root for 3 days, it's not going to take root in time for the Korban HaOmer. If you thought you could work on the 14th, then you could be weeding your field on the 14th and you'd still have 3 days. So why do you pick the example of on the 13th? He could have said even on the 14th. Ba'ika, arba'asar, chameshasar, u'miktzat shitzar. We know that in halacha, we have the concept of miktzat hayom kikulo. Part of the day counts as a whole day. So if you planted it on the 14th, you can count the 14th, you can count the 15th, you can count the 16th, right? So you have 3 days. So Amar Rava, to 2 answers are given. Number 1, is where I started with saying this whole question was a weird premise. Why do you assume Rabbi Yehuda held like the people in Yehuda? Maybe he held like the people in the Galil and who forbade work. And that's why he used the 13th and not the 14th. So Rava says, Galil Shanu. Oh, it must be the Galil. So then they ask, Ba'ikalelia. It could have been that he was weeding it on the night of the 14th still. That could have been an option because we don't hold like Beit Shammai. Oh, well, one is Rav Shesha ke Beit Shammai. Maybe this source goes like Beit Shammai, that you can't do it at night, and that's why he said the 13th. Or Rav Ashi Omer La'olam ke Beit Hillel, and this is more obvious answer. They didn't bring an example of someone weeding at night because who on earth would be weeding at night? In those days, it was pitch black outside. There were no street lights or anything else. Nobody would weed their fields at night. That would be ridiculous. So maybe that's why. But now we have a different type of answer. Ravina Amar La'olam biYehuda ubahashrasha chad miktzat hayom kekulo amrinan trei miktzat hayom kekulo lo amrinan. When it comes to taking root, we don't say miktzat hayom kekulo in both directions. I'll give you an example. When someone sits Shiva, what do? The first day counts as long as they sit for a little while, and the last day counts as long as they sit for a little while. So you really only end up with 5 full days of Shiva generally. That's miktzat hayom kekulo on both sides. What they say is when it comes to something taking root, you don't need 72 hours, right? 3 full days, but you do need 2 full days and 1 part day. I was thinking of when you plan a trip, right? They have a lot of these charter flights in the days when we used to travel. So, from Sunday to Thursday, it sounds like, oh, you have 5 days, but you don't really have 5 days because Sunday is a travel day and Thursday is a travel day, and you really only end up with 3 good days of traveling. So it's the same idea here. So when it comes to traveling, right, you don't want to lose out on both sides, maybe one side, but you want to have your full days in. So that's basically what they're saying here. When it comes to taking root, it needs to have, you need to have 3 full days. Okay, now, next Mishnah. If you started doing work before the 14th, you're allowed to continue doing it on the 14th, okay? But Lo yatzchil ba b'tchila ba'arba'asar. Now this seems to be even in a case. This is Rabbi Meir who thinks it's all minhag based, but it sounds like even Rabbi Meir is saying if you didn't start it before today, you can't just start a new malacha. You want to sew a dress. You can't start sewing your dress in the morning of Pesach, right? It's not the best time to start some project in your house to renovate something or I don't know what. It's not a good day to start something. If you were in the middle of something, you could finish it. We're gonna have a big debate in the Gemara. In the middle of what? Anything, or like painting your house, or does it have to be something that's for the purpose of the holiday? You might say painting your house is for the purpose of the holiday because you want your house to look nice, but maybe something totally disconnected. Depends what kind of a person you are and how you like your house to look, right? Okay, so now, even if it's something small, okay, let's say you can sew a dress in an hour and you have enough time to start a dress and finish it. And let's say you don't need your dress for Chag, you're just doing an everyday dress. So even then, if you could still start it and finish it, it's like we talked about the boat travel the other day. And from Tzur to Sidon, you could get there and back on Friday, right? So therefore people permitted it, even though other boat rides, you can't even go from Wednesday. But if you could do it, usually we allow it. In this case, we don't allow it. Right? It's really this idea that day you're totally focused on Pesach, right? Don't start doing other things. But again, we're going to see there's this debate. Is it only for the purpose of the holiday? Or if you started something before, could you finish it? We're going to have a big question as soon as we get to the Gemara. Chachamim omrim, the rabbis add, Shlosha umaniyot osim alacha b'arvei Pesachim ad chatzot. Someone in the Hebrew shir had a great answer. I'm sorry, I didn't think of it when I was teaching it then. But there's 3 jobs that in Hebrew we would call them chiyuniyot, right? Forget the term in English, but nowadays, right? If there's a closure, right? We're in the middle of a closure in Israel, and only things that are absolutely necessary, essential. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Essential, right? So essential workers are allowed to go to work, but right here you see there's certain essential workers who can work and do their job on Erev Pesach. Who are they? Okay, what would be essential workers? So the chayatim, the tailors, the saparim, the hair cutters, and the kofsim, the launderers. Those are the people that are necessary. We're going to see in the Gemara why they call them necessary and why they think it's okay. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda omer af ratzanim, even shoemakers. Okay, because people need shoes for the holiday. So Gemara says, it's interesting, by the way, that they don't have bakeries and kitchen, like people who sell takeout food. Okay, it could be really everyone was baking their own stuff, although you do see, bakers and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe on matzah people made their own. It's interesting. So now they ask a question, and they're going to give 3 possibilities here. Litzorach hamoed snan, aval shelo litzorach hamoed afilu migmar nami lo, and I charted this all out on the sheet if you look there. Is it the topic? He didn't say it's for the purpose of the holiday. He just said, Rabbi Meir, that you can't start, you can only finish. Does he mean that it also has to be for the holiday? And aval shelo litzorach hamoed, and then it would be inferred that if his topic is only things for the holiday, then things that aren't for the holiday, you can't even finish. If you started making a dress yesterday and you don't need your dress for the holiday, you can't finish it up on your dalit. Afilu migmar nami lo, you can't even finish it. O Dilma, possibility number 2. Shelo litzorach hamoed snan. It's talking about things that are not for the holiday. If it's not for the holiday, you can't start, but you can finish. And then what would be inferred from here? Aval litzorach atchule matchilinam. But if you need it for the holiday, you can even start. Oh, Dilma, 3rd possibility, and both the first 2 possibilities distinguish between the 2 cases. Maybe the 3rd possibility is there's no distinction. As the Mishnah didn't distinguish, maybe there's really no distinction. Oh, Dilma, bein l'tzorach hamoed, bein shelo l'tzorach, whether it's for the holiday, whether it's not. Migmar in atchule lo. You can only finish, you can't start. So we're going to have 3 attempts to try to prove it. We'll only be able to prove it from the last one. Each of the first 2 are going to be rejected. Tashma, let's learn from here. Tanaitic source. You can't start doing something on the 14th, even if it's a small belt or the sfacha was the covering, the hair covering the women wore, which we talked about in Masechet Shabbat about carrying the hairnet. So even a sfacha ktana. Now, my afilu, what does it mean even? Lav afilu hani de l'tzorach hamoed. Isn't it trying to tell you even these, even though they're for the purpose of the holiday, because you need belts and you need your hairnet, migmar in atchule lo, and then it's trying to tell you that even for the purposes of the holiday, you can't start something new. And then implied from there would be if it's not for the purpose of the holiday, you can't even do it at all. Right? That if it's not for a holiday, you can't even finish. So they say lo, you don't have to understand. The main word they were darshaning here was afilu. Even if it's for the holiday, you can't, which means if it's not for the holiday, for sure you can. You can't even do anything. So then they say, no, even if it's not for the holiday, theoretically, you should be able to finish. How do you read afilu then? My afilu. Afilu haninami dezutcheninu. Even these that are small, now what's the even? Not that you can finish them, but you might have thought it takes you, let's say, 10 minutes to put this together. So you might even be able to start it. Trying to tell you, even these that are so quick and easy to do, right? You might think you could start doing them. It's coming to teach you, even something small, you can't start, which means it's not telling you even for the holiday, and it doesn't have to do with that. Tashma. Let's try another attempt. Rabbi Meir Homer. Okay, so anything that's for the purpose of the holiday, this sounds like our, right here, notice it says litzorach hamoed. You can finish on the 14th. Matai, when is that? Bizman sheitchil b'kodem arba'asa, right? This is if you started it before the 14th. Aval lo itchil b'kodem arba'asa, lo yatchil b'arba'asa. But if you didn't start it from before, you can't start on the 14th. Afilu, again, we have this afilu, even it's tziltzul katan, afilu sfacha ktana. So what do you see here? The subject was tzorech hamoed. Sounds like l'tzorech hamoed in, shelo l'tzorech hamoed lo. So now they're saying no. Huadin, no, you could explain it. Afilu shelo l'tzorech nami gamrinan. It's also the same. You could say it's the same for both. Why did it stress l'tzorech hamoed? Hakamash malan to afilu l'tzorech hamoed migmar ina tchule lo. Even for the purpose of the holiday, you can only finish. In other words, the point was, if it's for the purpose of the holiday, you still can't start. But it could be the same thing if it's not for the purpose of the holiday. So you can't necessarily infer from here. Tashma, last source. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kol malachashi l'tzorach hamoed gomra ba'arba'asa, v'she'ena l'tzorach hamoed asur. Now here it says it explicitly. You see that? If it's the purpose of the holiday, you finish it on the 14th. But if it's not for the purpose of the holiday, it's forbidden. The other source said purpose of the holiday, but didn't say what about if it's not for the purpose of the holiday. This says it explicitly. Now that we're just going to read the end of the Braita, but the proof is already there. So it's not so clear why they bring this inference here. Okay, maybe it's just quoted from somewhere else, which is, you do malachan erev Pesach until chatzot if you live in a place where they do it, which sounds like if you live in a place, yes. If you don't live in a place, then no. And then if not, right? So then, again, this isn't really for our purposes now, but the main thing is the beginning part, which is Shema Mina l'tzorach hamoed in, shalo l'tzorach hamoed lo. So there it says very clearly that if it's not for the purpose of the holiday, you can't do it. And this seems to be even in a place where you have a minhag to do malacha, it's only malacha that you are finishing up, okay, and not starting. Chachamim omrim shalosh umaniyot. So where do they get these 3 umaniyot? And we're going to start to make comparisons, and we're going to do this for the rest of the daf, between Chol HaMoed and Erev Pesach. And again, it depends how you view Erev Pesach, right? We're going to say Chol HaMoed, you're not allowed to do work. Now notice that's because the Torah calls it a holiday. Because of that, you're not allowed to do work. Again, it's not the same kind of Isur Melacha as on a regular Chag, as we all know. And there's certain things that we're going to be lenient about. If there's a need, if it's Davar Ha'aved, it's going to get destroyed, right? Ruin, financial loss. So now we're going to make a bit of a comparison between the two and say, well, if it's allowed on Chol HaMoed, then we're going to go one step farther on Erev, because Erev is obviously going to be more lenient than Chol HaMoed, because Chol HaMoed comes up in the Torah. Erev Pesach, now, it does come up in the Torah as Chag HaPesach, this day of sacrificing, but it never says anything about Malacha and Kodesh and all that, which would infer Malacha. So, not doing work. So there's going to be this, whatever it says for that must be a little bit more lenient for Erev Pesach, but we're going to use that as our baseline. So Tana, we're going to bring a Braita that says the following, HaChayatim. So this is the topic is the Erev Pesach. On Erev Pesach, why are tailors allowed to work? Sheken hediot tofer kedarko b'chalosh hamoed. On Chol HaMoed, a tailor's not allowed to work because a tailor that's his field. So you're not allowed to work on Chol HaMoed. But if you're an individual, you can sew on Chol HaMoed if you need. So since an individual can sew on Chol HaMoed, we can assume, again, take it one step earlier, say, well, then also the tailor can work on Erev Pesach. Hasaparim v'akofsim. Each time we're going to find there's some sort of dispensation on Chol HaMoed, and therefore we're going to allow it in more cases on Erev Pesach. Sheken habami medinat hayam. If you came from abroad, where they wouldn't ever want to cut your hair, or to wash your clothes, or you got out of jail right in the middle of the holiday, you can get a haircut, but you're not supposed to get a haircut. You're not supposed to launder your clothes on Chol HaMoed. But if you couldn't have done it before the holiday for various reasons, then we allow you to do it on Chol HaMoed. So therefore, again, we're going to allow the experts in the field, we're going to allow them to work on Erev Pesach. Rabbi Yehuda, where does he get these? And we're going to see why do the rabbis disagree. The people who go on Aliyah L'Regel can fix their shoes on Chol HaMoed. So, right, I'm sorry, but it reminds me of another good story. My son went on Yam L'Yam with some friends, and some of you know this story. And on the very first 10 minutes of the walk, his shoes fell apart entirely. They disintegrated. He had these hiking shoes that were old, and they totally disintegrated. And he taped them up somehow. He found it was ridiculous. He had like no real shoes to wear. I think he had like Na'od or something, and ended up hiking in them for 3 days. So you could see how Olei Regalim, shoemakers are necessary, right? We should start putting shoemakers on the Yam L'Yam Tiyul for all those people who have that trouble. So anyway, Olei, right? For those who don't know Yam L'Yam, it's a walk from the Mediterranean to the Kinneret. Okay, Sheken Olei Regalim etaknim min alehem cholosh hamoed. So since on Chol HaMoed, you can have shoemakers working to fix people's shoes. Therefore, we allow them even to make shoes before the holiday on Erev Pesach. B'mai kamiflage. What's the root of this debate between them? Some people, one opinion says that you can learn the beginning of the work from the end of the work. What does this mean? Making shoes can be derived from fixing shoes. If we allow fixing shoes, then we can allow making shoes. Those are two different things. The fact that we allow shoemakers to fix shoes is not the same as making shoes. That's something different. So you can't learn one from the other, and that's why the Chachamim don't have the shoemakers on their list. Mishnah. For this, you need a little background in brooding of Tarnagolim. I tried to look it up, but you see that they don't, when you look these things up, unless it's someone who's trying to connect it to the daf, they don't really give you the details that are necessary for understanding the details mentioned in the daf specifically. But if someone does better research and finds, please share. Moshivim shavachim letarnagolim b'yudalid. You can put your hens to brood, to let the eggs hatch on yudalid. B'tarnagolit shabarcha machzirinot halim koma. Okay, first of all, that's work, right? So you're allowed to do it to help incubate the eggs. And a tarnagolet that ran away, machzirinot halim koma. If she was doing that and then she ran off, you bring her back. In fact, in the small research I did, it said that if you can't force a hen to brood, that it just won't work. But this is interesting. The Mishnah seems to think that you can. So again, I don't know very much about these things. And if the tarnagolet dies, you can put a different one in her place. Gorfimi, where there's going to be 3 topics here, and then the Gemara is going to go into each 3 topics. Gorfimi tachat raglei behema b'yom tov. You can sweep up the dung of the animal underneath the animal on Erev Pesach. Ubimoed, and on Chol HaMoed misalkin l'tzdadim. You can move it to the side. You can't exactly sweep it all up. Molichin kelim u'mivi'im mibeit ha'uman. You can bring items that need fixing to a fix-it place, and you can bring them back home. Even if it's not for the purposes of the holidays. So we're going to get back to this soon. Hashta. So the Gemara starts off with the tarnagol. So the tarnagol. Something doesn't make sense here with this hen. Hashta utuve mutvina nahadure mibaya. If you can put them on from the beginning to go on the eggs, of course you can return one to its place. Wouldn't that be obvious? Now, maybe based on what I read, that it's not really effective. Maybe that's why it's less obvious, by the way. But anyway, that's not the way they understood it. What they're saying is on Erev, and here we're going to see again the difference. On Erev Pesach, you can even put them on from the beginning. Okay, what happens is, remember, the egg before the brooding, the egg can be used as food. You can eat the egg. After brooding, it turns into a chick. So, and then we're going to talk about what happens in the process. At what point does it cross the line that you can't use it as food anymore, and it can only be used as a chick? And then there'll be like a loss if you don't get the hen back. So anyway, we're going to talk about this soon. So Abaye basically answers, it's very simple. Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to only return, because there you have to be more strict. You can't put it on from the beginning, but on Erev Pesach you can. Amar Rav Huna, Lo shanu ela, we're now going to have a machloket Rav Huna Rabbi Ami. Lo shanu ela betoch shlosha lemirda. It's only if they ran away within the first 3 days. No, sorry, my mistake. It's only if you caught up to the hen within 3 days of its brooding. Why is that? This is what I couldn't find so much information about. Because there's a certain heat about the animal of the hen, and that heat goes away after 3 days of not brooding, which means basically you're going to end up, it's useless. It's ineffective to bring them back after 3 days. And only if it ran away within the first, after 3 days of it sitting on the egg. If it ran away before 3 days elapsed, then pasta lebe legamre, right? In the case where it's after 3 days, there's nothing to do with these eggs at this point, because no one's going to eat them. After 3 days, something already happened to the egg. You can't eat it anymore. So if she's already run and is 3 days away, or she sat already for 1 second, which then, right, then, or it's within the first 3 days, where if it's within the first 3 days, you could still eat the egg. Okay, so if it's within the first 3 days she ran off, then you can't bring the hen back. Again, the idea here is that it's work. You have to chase down the hen and you got to bring the hen back. That's work. You can't do that unless it's going to be a loss. Rabbi Ami Amar, he has a small disagreement. What happens is within the first 3 days, something minor changes. Now, the average person won't sense that, but someone who we call an istanis, a very particular eater, we all have those in our house, right? Particular eaters are going to notice that difference, and they won't eat the egg even if the hen started the process, even if it's within the first 3 days. So he says, once it's a little bit different, already we're going to say you can bring that hen back. So b'may plige, what's the machloket between them? Mar savar lehefse meruba chashashu, lehefse muat lo chashashu. Rav Huna says, we're not worried about a minor. So the fact that you can't sell your eggs to a few people, or some people won't eat them, somebody will eat it. Umar Savar lehefsei muat nami chashashu. Some people say no, hefsei muat. We also are concerned for, right? This is like you burn your food. Some people might eat it in your house, other people might not. Is that considered a loss, right? You'll find someone who's willing to eat it like that. Okay, gorfin mitachat. I burnt my soup last night. That's why I was thinking of it. Gorfin mitachat. So now we can sweep away the excrement, the dung of the animal. So again, you can only move it to the side, they say on Chol HaMoed, and you can sweep it on Erev Chag. So Tanu Rabbanan, we're now going to see different sources here. Hazevel shebachatzer, if you have dung in your courtyard, misalkino to litzdadim, you move it to the side. Notice what's missing here. It doesn't tell you, are we talking about Chol HaMoed or are we talking about Erev Chag? So it says, okay, if it's in your courtyard, you move it to the side. If it's in the barn or the courtyard, motziino to lashpa, you could take it out to the garbage. Now, I don't know if you paid attention, but there's this clear contradiction here because courtyard appears in the first part and it says, move it to the side. You can't take it out to the garbage. And courtyard appears in the second line that says, take it out to the garbage. So Haguf Akashya, this contradicts itself. You said you move it to the side only. And then Hadartani Shebarefet Vishabachatzer in the barn and in the courtyard. Motziino to lashpa. So what's the situation here? So Amar Abaye lo kashya kamba yudale kamba cholosh moed. And we'll see this answer a few times in different cases, right? It's a difference between, we keep saying this, Erev Pesach and Chol HaMoed. Erev Pesach, you can actually take it out to the garbage. On Chol HaMoed, you can't. Rava Amar, he has a different answer. Hava haba cholosh moed. V'hachi kamar. They're both on Chol HaMoed, and this is what it's saying. Im na'asah chatzer kerefet motziino to lashpa. When it says shebarefet v'shebachatzer, they mean when the chatzer becomes like a barn. Now, there's two ways you can understand this, or maybe even more. Either the smell is horrible, right? With barns, we all know smell. When the smell gets so bad in your courtyard from the dung that it smells like your barn, then you're allowed to dump it out into the garbage because then it's bothering you. Or it's when it becomes full and it looks like a barn, when it fills up your space in your chatzer and there's so much dung that you have to remove it, then you could take it out to the garbage. Obviously, if it's full, it's going to also smell. So it's probably a combination. Molichim kelim u'mevi'im mi beit ha'uman. So now it says you can bring, and this is the hardest part of the mission to understand, because why should you be allowed to bring utensils and bring them back if there's really no purpose for the holiday? So Amarav Papa Badiklam Rava asked the following question. Tznan. Molichin u'mevi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman alpa pisha enan letzorach hamoed. That's our Mishnah. Urimidu, and then he brings a source from Moed Katan. Ein mevi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman. I think it's from Moed Katan. I think this one, I don't recall 100%. But anyway, it says in this source, Molichin u'mevi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman. You can take utensils, right? Molich and mevi means both directions, right? Bring them there, take them back. Sorry, I'm reading the wrong source. Uriminhu. Ein mevi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman. You cannot bring, okay, here it says, you cannot bring utensils back from where you brought them, the repair shop. But if you're worried they're going to get stolen, then you can bring them to another courtyard. I don't think this is actually Moed Katan because I see that, right? It's going to be the Breita further on is in Moed Katan. My mistake. There's a Breita coming up. This is not. So now it says, if you're worried, right, you bring your car to the garage. Now, if it's a place that's not so safe, it's in a bad area, I don't know what, and you're worried it'll get stolen from there, so you're allowed to pick it up on Chol HaMoed because you might lose your car, right? It might get stolen. So now, Mishanin, so what's the problem? Our Mishnah didn't seem to say only if you're worried it's going to get stolen, right? And this Mishnah says you can't do it normally, only if you're worried it's going to get stolen. U'mishanin lo kasha, just like we said before, kamba arba'asar, kamba cholosh hamoed. Again, our Mishnah is talking about Erev Pesach, and that Mishnah is talking about Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed were more strict. But just like before, we're going to have a different answer. But eventually, we're going to reject the second answer. They're both talking about Chol HaMoed. It depends if they're a trustworthy person. Now, why you bring yourself to someone who's not trustworthy? So maybe think of there's some, I'm not going to say what, but there's one job in Ranana that there's just nobody who's reliable to do it. And I always end up bringing my stuff to someone I don't really trust, but I don't really have a choice. So I guess you could see that could happen. If you trust the person, then you leave it there. But if you don't really trust them, then you can go get it. The Hatanya, and here's a Breita to support this. Mivi'im kelim mi beit ha'uman kigon hakab mi beit ha'kadar, like the jug from the house where the place where they fix jugs. Ba'akos mi beit ha'zagag, and the glass from the place from the glass blower. But not wool from the dyer and not kelim from the Beit HaUman. That's our case, right? From someone who's fixing them. This is the source that appears in Moed Katan. If you don't have anything to eat, then, right, if the guy doesn't have what to eat, then you give him, let's say he can't afford, right? Like you leave it there. It's very nice for you. You know, you're not going to work on Chag, but this guy only gets paid when you pick it up. This is a great line. This says, if he needs the money, then you have to pay him, but you still leave your item with him. Okay, because right, we'll get in Bava Metzia, whose responsibility is if something happens in his property after you pay, before you pay it anyway. That's a whole different, that's a Bava Metzia issue. Okay, so now they say, V'im ein mami, no, here's the important part of that Braita, but if you don't trust him, then you take it out of his house and you put it somewhere, the closest place you can find that's trustworthy, which shows here that there's a difference between trusting. If you trust the person, then you can. If you don't trust a person, if you trust a person, then you have to leave it there. If you don't trust them, then you can move it. But even here, when you can move it, you can only move it to close by. If you're worried it's going to get stolen, then you can bring it. If you're worried that there's no safe place, then you can bring it home. Okay, so here you see there's a distinction, and that explains this distinction between trusting and not. So now they say, wait a minute. That doesn't resolve our whole Mishnah. That resolved one element of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah talked about two things, bringing it and bringing it home. That resolved teratzta, that resolved mivi'in, that you can bring it back home. But it doesn't explain why you can bring it there in the first place. If you don't need your stuff dry cleaned, you can't bring it to a dry cleaner on the Chag. So why are they allowing you to do that? So the katani ein mivi'in, but kosh came to emolichim, right? It says you can't bring, obviously also then you can't bring home. You obviously also can't bring there. So elam chuvarta kedushanina meikara. So they go back to the original, that it must be a distinction between the 14th and Chol HaMoed. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today, and you'll start tomorrow with the Anshe Yericho. If you have time before Shabbat, either read or print out Shuli Mishkan's article. She has a good article about the people of Jericho, a little bit of history, and a little bit of a little chidush of hers about how to understand something in the sugya. So happy reading for Shabbat, and have a good Shabbat, everybody.